You know, it's been a minute since I spoke about James Bond. A fun fact, a review of No Time to Die was actually the first video I ever uploaded to this channel 3 years ago. Things have been pretty quiet on the James Bond front for a while now, and it doesn't sound like we're going to be getting any major updates on the new film anytime soon. But in the meantime, we've got 007 First Light coming out next year. Been waiting for an update on this project since... Jesus. I love when a video game gets announced and then you have to wait like 5 years to actually learn anything about it. 007 First Light, developed by IO Interactive, the team behind the Hitman franchise, are turning out a new James Bond game. The first one in like 13 years, if you don't count James Bond Cypher, which we don't. And man, I've got to say after watching this trailer, I'm pretty hyped for it. Can't really think of a better developer to handle the Bond IP than IO Interactive, the studio famous for the Hitman games. I mean, give this guy some hair and change his codename from Agent 47 to 007, and you have a pretty great series of James Bond games already. From a technical perspective, I think the game's a lock. I'm not really worried about anything there. The choice of developer is spot on. But what really has me interested in this game is what the developers are doing with James Bond narratively. First Light is going to focus on James Bond before he's even become a 00. So this Bond is going to be young. Younger than we've ever seen in any of his on-screen appearances, and I can understand how some people might be put off by that, but not me because I actually think that's a great place to start with a Bond story. On-screen Bond's life pre-00 agent status hasn't really been explored all that much. When you meet James Bond for the first time in Casino Royale, he's already been a 00 agent for a bit already, but this game will actually show Bond as a raw recruit straight out of the Navy, working towards becoming a 00. And man, that's a story that actually has some serious potential behind it. In the films and books, we're used to seeing Bond as this effortlessly cool guy who leads a life any man would love to have, going to all these exotic locations, doing all this cool spy shit. But what I really love about the Craig era of Bond films are those moments when all of the supposed glamour of being a spy gets stripped away, where you get a peek behind the veil of what being a spy is actually like, at the cost of it all, at the stuff that doesn't paint Bond or his life as a spy in the most flattering light, when we get scenes like these.
Psychological evaluation, alcohol and substance addiction indicated.
If all the vodka martinis ever silence the screams of all the men you've killed.
Just look at you, barely held together by your pills and your drink.
You do what I do for too long, and there won't be any soul left to salvage.
What if you find forgiveness in the arms of all those willing women? For all the dead ones you failed to protect.
We didn't see stuff like this explored in the earlier Connery and more Bond films, but the Craig era Bond films were kind of defined by the less glamorous aspects of spying and espionage work, the guilt, grief and regret, and how basically being a spy/assassin really hollows you out as a person. I've heard some media critics complain about Craig's Bond being too vulnerable and depressed, and that Bond being portrayed like this isn't in keeping with how the character should be depicted, that Bond should always be this stoic machine who never shows any emotion, and who needs to be effortlessly cool and suave at all times. The thing about that is though, James Bond isn't a psychopath. He lost the love of his life when Vesper died at the end of Casino Royale. That's obviously going to have an impact on someone. He was planning to leave the service so he could be with her. The death of Vesper Lynd doesn't hang over Bond in the books like it does in the Craig films, but that's not a bad creative change either. Seeing Bond struggling with the loss of someone that he really cared about over the course of these 5 films, that makes Bond more human. It makes him feel a lot more grounded. The exploration of the more vulnerable side of Bond's character was the stuff that really sold me on the Craig era. And sure, I like Bond as a cold, ruthless assassin. I love those original Fleming novels for the way they portray Bond, not in spite of the way they portray him. Bond is allowed to change a little bit. By the time Craig took over the role from Brosnan, the franchise had been going for 44 years. 6 other actors had taken a shot at this character. Do you know how boring it would be if every one of these guys played the character the exact same way, and no writer ever tried to take a different approach with the character and try something new? So why am I going off on a side tangent about Daniel Craig's Bond when this is a video about 007 First Light? Well, the writers on First Light don't want Bond to start out as the typical Bond we know. They want to develop him into that over the course of a few games. And that's the catch that really has me interested here. We're going to see this guy become Bond. He's not Bond yet, and the Craig era, more so than any other, is the one that I'm hoping the writers of this game will take inspiration from when crafting this new James Bond. That vulnerable side of James Bond that got explored in the Craig films, That's the stuff I want to see the writers really explore in this new franchise. This new narrative that IO are crafting sounds like, while being true to the spirit of the Fleming books, will be wholly its own thing, not beholden to any book or film continuity. And I'm fine with that. IO want to take their version of James Bond in a new direction. I'm good with any direction they choose to take the character in. My only ask is this, that every narrative choice that the writers want to make in this first game should really inform this new version of Bond's development and personality in the future games. This first game needs to really do the formative foundational work of setting Bond on the path to becoming that legendary spy. From a narrative perspective, IO have a blank canvas and total creative freedom to basically rewrite Bond's story and history from the ground up. And I want them to tell me the story of how this raw, well-meaning recruit of 26 turned into the ruthless, cold-blooded assassin we all know and love over the course of a few games. That's a story we really haven't seen before. So here's what I would like to see out of this story. Already from the first trailer, there looks to be an emphasis on Bond working at least some of his missions as part of a team with other 00 agent recruits, and that's something we really haven't seen before, and something I think that could be used to develop Bond in a new way. If Bond's working with a team, then that kind of makes him vulnerable to trusting other people, and here maybe, while working in this team, Bond kind of gets burned. Maybe one of these 00s he's friends with is actually a traitor and defects, and Bond learns the lesson that you really can't trust anyone in this line of work. Or maybe a lot of these guys that he befriends just don't make it to the end. It's a dangerous line of work, and maybe this will kind of push Bond down the path of becoming more of a solo agent who keeps those around him at arm's length for fear of becoming too attached. Another aspect that this game could play with is how they incorporate moral dilemmas with player actions. You know, while Bond is always described as a spy, you could easily describe him as an assassin, and you'd be right on the money too. Bond is often sent on a mission somewhere to gather information or whatever, but more often than not, this guy's job is to just outright sanction someone. I keep thinking about that scene from Pandora Tomorrow, where Sam Fisher is ordered to execute Dahlia Tal, a woman he's been working with, and it's left entirely up to the player if they want to do it or not. I love this part of the game because it was a real sobering moment when you realize, yeah, as an operative, you will be asked to do things that are just outright morally reprehensible sometimes. Kill people you work with, and you're not supposed to ask any questions.
Fisher, we need Dahlia Tal dead. Kill her. Don't think, just do it.
Tell me what I just did, Lambert.
The right thing. Hard work, but it had to happen.
Killing unarmed women seems mighty close to terrorism.
Shut up, Fisher. Leave the ethics to us.
I want to see something like this incorporated into First Light. Moral dilemmas and player choices that aren't afraid to make James Bond look like a bad guy from time to time. Choices that really lean into the dark, nasty side of espionage work. And these moral dilemmas should have long-lasting consequences for Bond and his character in this series. I want to see the damage build up on this Bond over the course of a few games, and see him actually have regrets about some of the things he's done, and maybe some of the people he's had to kill. There's this one great scene in Casino Royale right at the start that I think sums up the Craig era of Bond films for me. It's the prologue, where Bond has to kill a man as part of his first assignment to find a mole. And right after he kills this guy, or at least when Bond thinks he's dead, you can just see the weight of his actions settle on him. Like he's just realized the cost of taking a man's life. In-game, Bond shouldn't be able to just murk someone and not care about it. At least not at the start. I want to see Bond not care about it the more he has to do it. I want to see him work up to a moment like this.
I'm just a professional doing a job.
Me too.
The other really great thing about the Craig Bond films that I would like to see IO take inspiration from was how they underline just how unglamorous this line of work is with the action scenes. You can call these fight scenes in the Craig era a lot of things, but you can't call them glamorous. You can't call a scene where one guy has to practically beat another into unconsciousness and then try to drown him in a public bathroom sink glamorous or heroic or cool. The action and violence in those early Craig films was meaningful. It had a point to it, and it was to show that there isn't really anything noble about this line of work. This is a nasty job, and you have to do horrible things in it. I feel like the violence in First Light should be treated like this also. And this isn't really something I think you need to delve into in the first game, but it's something I'd like to see explored in future entries. Bond is known to be a drinker. It's a pretty big part of his character. But what would be really great to see would be how he starts to gain more and more of a dependency on alcohol as he gets older and the toll of this job weighs on him more and more. You might think from this video that I'm advocating for the Bond franchise to become more introspective and cerebral. Not true. I love the world of Bond as it is. I'm 100% down for the more off-the-wall elements of Bond, like the secret bases and the gimmicky henchmen, the gadgets and the over-the-top action. I just really like all this other stuff that the Craig era did too. What I really loved about No Time to Die was that it was the first in the Craig era that really felt like it was embracing the older, more traditional elements of the franchise, the more over-the-top stuff. I think No Time to Die is the perfect fusion of new and classic Bond, and that's what I'm hoping IO will do here with First Light. Hold to the nature of the Fleming books, while also embracing the realism and grittiness of the Craig era. IO could, if they wanted to, just make an action-adventure romp, and it would be great. I don't think anyone would have an issue with that. But we're in a time where some people cite the narratives from games like The Last of Us and God of War as some of their favorite in fiction, for their exploration of characters and themes. It would be a massive miss on IO's side to let the story take a backseat to the gameplay, especially when there is such a great story to be told with a young James Bond working his way towards becoming a 00. So yeah, kind of a quick video this week, just some of my thoughts on 007 First Light and why I'm excited for it. I've been waiting for 5 years for an update on this game. I like Bond in a modern setting, but I was holding on to hope that maybe IO might want to bring James Bond back to his early Cold War roots and have these games set in the 50s and 60s. Still, the modern setting looks slick though. This trailer does a great job of selling that classic Bond tone. I mean, this looks like a movie. So First Light, what do you think about it? Are you hyped? Do you want to see this game embrace the Craig era with its approach to character development and storytelling? Or shit, maybe you think a return to a more traditional Bond is exactly what the franchise needs right now? Feel free to shout at me in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz. Maybe hit the notification bell on your way out. And as always, thanks for watching.